On March 31st, 1848, the Fox sisters introduced a spiritualist movement to the United States when they came in contact with a ghost of a murder victim in their Hayesville, New York home. The belief that spirits of the dead coexist and can communicate with the living spread across the United States, making spiritualism an everyday part of life in Victorian society. Tonight, we discuss the movement and its impact on society with Cincinnati based historian and author Jeff Suess. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents the Hometown Haunts podcast. I'm your host, Kat Cloco, and with me every week we have Jen Kohler and Christina Wald. Welcome, everyone, to the show. You can follow us on social media at Cin Cabinet Curio on Twitter and at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram. And of course, if you have your own hometown haunt, weird history, creepy cryptid, ghost story, urban legend, or miscellaneous interesting weird history, you can always share that with us at hometownhauntedmail@gmail.com. We are waiting to hear from you. Of course, we're also an official podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, and SoundCloud. Thank you, Jen. Find us on iTunes at Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities. Please rate and review us there on YouTube, also where you can see us. Hello. And so other spooky lovers, creepy cryptid lovers, weird history lovers, just like you, can find us. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Jeff Suess, who is the librarian and history columnist at the Cincinnati Enquirer and the author of several books on local history, including Lost Cincinnati, Hidden History of Cincinnati, and Cincinnati: An Illustrated Timeline. Welcome back to the show, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to be back.
Yeah, yeah, it's keeping cool, I hope.
As best it can be.
Yeah, we're all kind of melting here. So we had you on before talking about some of the great architecture and history of, I think, Burnet Woods from an earlier episode, and you are working with Christina on the Magic 8-Ball.
The comic.
Yeah, comic. I was like, submission was the word I was looking for this year's Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities comics anthology, which is I love it. It's a great, retelling or telling of Cincinnati
graphic
history.
retelling. Yeah.
It's a really neat way that you wrote it, where it's told from the point of view of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which I think is a very interesting take. I don't think a lot of people know that he has a connection to Cincinnati, and that's why I think the story is so great for the anthology.
Yeah. And I know personally, I just got my copy of Hidden History of Cincinnati, and I've been reading through that, and that's been really fun. So I enjoy your books, Jeff.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And then tonight, you're sharing with us the history of spiritualism in Victorian time, basically. And where would you like to start?
These are, I'm not by no means any sort of expert or anything. It's just stuff I've kind of researched and read over the years. Some of it from researching the story for the comic. That was, I kind of spoke about her before, Laura Pruden, who is a well-known medium in Price Hill here. And from the kind of historic perspective of where spiritualism was coming out, is really kind of came out around the 1840s, 1850s. The Fox sisters were the kind of credited with the launching of that whole movement in the I forget the years, but 1848, something like that. And
especially launching it in the United States.
Right. I mean, and spiritualism, I think, is it's a kind of a global thing. It's more than just a bunch of mediums popping up. There's almost a reaction to how people's attitudes were changing. In particular, you have, the Industrial Revolution is kind of starting, and science is moving up, and essentially they're kind of starting to question the age-old beliefs of things, that science is proving things that are starting to question. It's basically, even does God exist, etc. And so people were really craving answers and beliefs. And to some degree, the idea of reaching out to an afterlife that is proof that an afterlife exists is therefore proof that God exists. And so that's what kind of is driving a lot of those beliefs. And Calvinism had been real big before that, where it was a lot of predestination, that we can't do anything um, to change our fate in afterlife. It's all predetermined, and this was that, and it's kind of the filling that void of, okay, our whole thought processes have changed. What is that? And I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of fear, I guess, but they kind of latched onto that. And so when you have the Fox sisters who are able to, the claim is that they can actually communicate with the other side. It's like, oh, okay, that's proof for the stuff that people have been talking about, and people kind of figured out other ways of communicating. And next thing you know, it's like a cottage industry all over the place, and some people got particularly good at it enough that they could start charging money, and they're all over. And it lasted quite a while. If you talk the 1840s and Laura Prudden's doing things in the 1920s, we think of trends. If it's 3 years old, that's it's passe. But this is something that took on enough that spiritualism was a partial religious movement. Part of it is the whole spiritual and paranormal, and it's more than just people who believe in ghosts. It really was their whole thought processes.
It tended to grow up along with two, I'm going to call cousins here. We got photography and science growing, like you got germ theory and all that being understood. And at the same time, you have Gothic horror becoming a popular subject. So they're all kind of growing in tandem, and they really collide in the late 1800s with spirit photography, I think. Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of going off of that, you look at stuff like Frankenstein. Those are talking about, it's Gothic horror writing about the technology and the spiritual matters of the soul and all that kind of stuff. It's all kind of hitting it together. So you're right; they're raising up in tandem. They're not vacuums. And spiritual photography is particularly where it kind of culminates in that.
Yeah, I think it gave it a second wind, because you definitely have spiritualism riding up really quickly with the Civil War. And you also have Mary Todd Lincoln, who was probably the US's most well-known spiritualist outside of the Fox sisters. And basically, you can imagine this trend started in the late 1840s. It was going to wane. And then you have the Civil War and Mary Todd Lincoln. And that just gave it this spark that it needed again, because this is a way now for everyone to be able to talk to the dead. You don't have to go through the Pope. You don't have to go through a priest. You don't even need to go through a minister. You can just get a talking board or any other form of divination, or maybe somebody is a spirit medium, which existed beforehand, and you can talk to your relative who passed away during the war.
And in particular, of course, the war was devastating, and so you have a lot of more tragedy, of people you're wanting to communicate with. We kind of saw that a little bit with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Later, it was his grief over losing his mother, and then later his son in the war, in World War I, that kind of drives them to that. There was a quote I read, something about the Civil War converted like 2 million people to spiritualism because this was a comfort again. And they're kind of reaching out to. And then you're talking about the photography, that's again science, but it's so harder to understand for people. We understand, even if we don't know the science of exactly how light is captured and all that stuff. The average person may not know all of that, but we're used to it. We forget about when new technology was coming in. this stuff is just completely mind blowing. And and some of it's apocryphal, but it's like those stories of like, are you capturing our soul in a photo, and then photo techniques that we can't explain, and long exposures and things like that look like ghost images, and all this stuff is very easy to then justify your claims. Oh well, this is this. A Doyle would have pictures of ectomorphs and things that they would say. It's like, well,
wasn't he
it's hard to disprove, right?
Wasn't he convinced by those fairy pictures too? That what was the name of that woman? That I'll have to look it up. That took all the pictures of the little fairies.
I remember the story. I can't remember her name, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Something I want to say. I'll look it up. But yeah, I mean, he was totally taken in by that, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I've always kind of felt with Doyle, I mean, I don't know his mind exactly, but it always seemed like he was just overcome with grief and wanting to believe. Because, here's a guy who, created Sherlock Holmes, the most logical, proof-oriented, creation. I mean, there's even a story where Holmes debunks there being ghosts. And then here, his creator, the guy who wrote those words, 10, 15 years later, is a firm believer. There's more to it than, oh yeah, he just believed.
Right. And I just looked it up. It's the Conningly Fairies is the name of the photo series, and it was that he believed in Elise Wright and Francis Griffiths were the photographers of that.
Yeah, I was just looking at the Conningly Fairies.
Yeah.
And it says Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was convinced that they were proof of magical beings, and he thought they were genuine.
Yeah. Haven't they said, though, that they still can't figure out how they took the photos? Or have they ever admitted to how they set them up or anything?
Oh, you know what? I don't know.
I heard a podcast about it not too long ago. I can't remember which one, or I saw it somewhere.
Well, that's definitely something to look into.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of fun to big
recreate.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you could do with double exposures and stuff like that, that if you knew what you were doing, you probably could do that. How much they knew then. I mean, it certainly in the late 1800s was a lot harder to take pictures,
yes.
Than it is now. Because of, like you were mentioning, the long exposure times and stuff like that. But I would think if you were very enterprising, I mean, I've known people that did a lot of work with film, and you could do some pretty convincing special effects, by double exposure and stuff like that. And to me, that's what this kind of looks like. Somebody was able to double expose something. I'm not sure totally how they did it. I mean, the thing that's nice about it, looking at the picture I'm looking at it, it's the fairies are kind of in a different light than the person is.
Yeah, they look very much like obvious cutouts that have been superimposed. But anyway, bringing us back to the spiritual movement, especially here in the United States, what I've always noticed just looking through like the popularity with talking boards or just other uses of what would be necromancy, being able to talk to the dead. It's not necessarily raising the dead from like a zombie. It's just being able to talk to them. And other forms of divination, they always tend to follow war, basically. Like they become popular during war. And you have it with the Civil War we were just talking about. And also, again, with World War I, that's when the Ouija board became really popular and other talking boards, to the point where in our contemporary media, there is a few scenes in Downton Abbey where it shows the different people using the talking board in one of the quarters. But Indiana, I know, I'm from Indiana. We have Camp Chesterfield. So do you know much about Camp Chesterfield, Jeff?
No, I don't. Not really. I mean, I've read a little bit about it, but not in any sort of, I don't even know if I could sum it up.
Well, like Ohio and Indiana saw a lot of people fight during the Civil War. If you go to Gettysburg, there is multiple federal I don't want to call them tombstones, monuments to different groups that fought in the war. And you can't go to any graveyard or cemetery in any of these states without tripping over veterans of that war. And Indiana had a really, they called him a champion of spiritualism, which was John Westerfield of Anderson. And he was the one who created the camp. Camp Chesterfield. It's just south of Muncie, if I remember, and it's still a functioning spiritualist community. And I was looking at their website earlier today. They still are doing events, but they're way trimmed down because of COVID. But you can go there and get read by true members of Spiritualist Church, and go shop there, learn about it. There's lots of places to kind of meditate and try to contact the dead. And this is a place I haven't been to. Maybe we can make it a field trip. But it's on the National Register of Historic Places because it's one of the few spiritualist communities outside the ones I think in New York State that still exist. And it's such an important cultural mark that just for religious purposes and cultural purposes that it's actually on that register. So,
do you think this movement was born mainly out of grief or fraud?
Isn't all religion?
I don't know. I just, you can see a more direct correlation with it because around wars, of course, you're going to want to try to talk to your loved one, especially if they were taken from you suddenly or in a horrific way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And with Conan Doyle, I mean, that's what drew him to it, right? Was the loss of his mother.
Yeah.
No.
So I know I'm not a grief counselor at any way, but people know that I do hunt ghosts, I guess, for a lack of a better term. So when they do have people that pass away in their families, I get contacted a lot asking if I know anyone whom they can talk to try to contact their dead relatives. And the mediums that I do know absolutely won't do it within the first 6 months to a year after death. If
really?
if they're, in my opinion, good mediums who are there just because for some reason they can talk to the dead and they seem to be pretty accurate with their readings, they will not talk to families who are still in mourning, because having had people pass away in my family, you can misinterpret every single thing said as something that your family member did or is relating to you in some way. And authentic mediums aren't looking for just broad generalizations. They want specific stuff, saying like at 7:37 every night, Dad went and watched a rerun of Jeopardy, but it had to be from the 1970s or whatnot. I have no idea. That's just an example. But you want specific stuff like that as a medium. You don't want to be saying, well, I feel like they wore a black hat. I hear a dog.
Yeah, that's my dog. My dog. I think it's
Is that your new one?
Yeah. Let me step away for just a second.
It's fine.
Well, that was not as loud as Boo barking the other week.
That was funny. That did wake everyone up.
Gave me a damn heart attack, that damn dog.
Oh yeah. Okay.
We have a puppy.
That's your
puppy.
That's your rescue fail.
Yeah. Yep. It's Grogu.
Oh, you adopted him, huh?
Yep.
Oh.
You want to come up
to the camera so we can see it?
Come on. He's pretty big now. Come on.
Don't pull your back out trying to lift it.
No.
Oh, what a cutie.
Hi,
He
baby.
has gotten big.
Yes.
I remember how little they were.
I know they were this big before.
Yeah.
Now he's big. And my wife is out, and so I'm making sure he doesn't eat everything.
Yeah.
Including you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I get that.
Get your monkey. Go get your
When we
monkey.
talk about what was the thing that made the sisters initially that skyrocketed them to fame?
So, the Fox sisters, so Margaret and Kate. Let me look them up really quick.
Was it
So-
that they just couldn't be debunked?
Well, so it was not just that, it was because they were so reliable about how they could contact the dead. So it all started in March of 1848, and the family started getting tapping in their house. And from what I remember off the top of my head, it was supposed to be a door-to-door salesman or a peddler of some sort that had been murdered in the homestead. And that's who they were talking to. And he kind of served as a spirit guide. And for those who aren't into the jargon of spiritualist movement or mediums, spirit guides act as a go-between between the human medium and the netherworld, basically. So they're kind of your little buffer that you want to have so that you can't get possessed, for instance, unless you were purposely trying to do that. And then you still have spirit guides there to try to keep full possession you want from happening. But it's not a possession like in The Exorcist. It's more of a possession like having Great Aunt Tilda talk through your body for a little bit. And there are mediums that do that. And during Lauren Pruden's time, there were a lot more mediums that did that. It's kind of a taboo thing to do now, just direct possession like that. So actually, talk about Lauren Pruden a little bit and her influence here in Cincinnati and abroad.
Well, didn't get much of a sense, frankly, of her being much of an influence in Cincinnati, because I think she was more known around. This is just me where she was, but apparently from the accounts, she was pretty well known in Europe, and and of course travel is difficult. So a lot of times I think she actually would go to like a city like New York or Chicago and meet up with people. So she was not always here in Cincinnati. But Doyle met her several times, but he was completely aware of her reputation even before they had met. I mean, he kind of made a point of meeting with her, and I have not steeped enough to know how well she compares to other mediums at the time, but meaning like in fame. But there's an awful lot written about her for something that's not really covered in a lot of mainstream reporting. And there's a lot of spiritualist societies, as we kind of mentioned before, that these were big societies with well-known. They're like it's not just a medium in a house with a whole business and putting up a sign saying I can talk to the dead. It's it's almost like an organization of connections. So in Cincinnati, there was a spiritualist group that she was a part of. That there was a lot of talk with them when she passed away, and she was supposed to pass on a message from beyond and stuff like that. So this was. I mean, it kind of, when reading about it, it reminded me of these, like literary club and stuff like that. It's kind of these names of movers and shakers in town, but these were all people who were
almost a secret society, or is that too?
I don't think it was a secret
connotation, not proper.
Yeah, but I think it was, a club, in that sense. Like Queen City Club or Literary Club and some of those that.
Yeah.
And
so I was noticing. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No. Go ahead.
No, we did a tarot episode a couple weeks ago, and the famous writer was it Ryder Smith? What's the third name? People get the idea. Tarot deck.
TWS Wright Smith.
Yeah. Like they were a group of spiritualists. Like the Smith, the artist, hung out with these spiritualist groups.
Yeah. And she drew the
and she
tarot
drew all the
deck at the
cards,
height.
yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
She
so
was drawing.
that was around the same time, 1909, I think, was when she drew them.
Yeah. So she was drawing it in the height of the spiritualist movement in really around the globe.
Mhm.
So it's interesting because there was different. Laura Pruden used what could be considered automatic writing from the way it was described, because she was using a little slate board and she was doing it like you would have a seance circle or a seance room. And in those cases, basically only candles were lighting the area, and depending on the medium, depended on how many candles, what kind of candles, and how long they would be burning. But generally, in a seance, everyone would gather at a table and hold hands, call forth the spirits, and then you would have your medium who would be performing whatever performative way to contact the dead. And in Laura Pruden's case, it was automatic writing because she was using the slate tablet to write, or used her body to write for the entity. And then you would also have people that would be clairvoyant, clairaudient. You would have people spewing ectoplasm from their mouths and noses, which are a lot of the more famous. Oh, Jen, am I grossing you out?
Yeah,
a lot
gross.
of times it was kind of like a treated cheesecloth that they would kind of take out of their mouths. And those are a lot of the famous spirit photography photos, would be somebody spewing this ectoplasm with a ghost behind them of like a dead soldier or a dead mother or sister. So
Ick.
very performative. And these, from what I've read, were highlights of a Saturday night. You would go to a friend's house, a medium, if there was a friend who was a medium, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's, I think, wife was a medium. So they would host parties and you would just have dinner and then seance. And from what I gathered just for tonight's show, there was a guy in Athens, Ohio, who wrote a guidebook of how to make a seance room and make one so that you could summon the dead easier and more efficiently.
Seems like a great thing to illustrate for issue 3. Like,
yeah,
I would love to do like a home, like a trading places, or not trading places, but HGTV, how to make your seance room.
That's room. That would be a nice little insert story.
But that's a show that needs to happen.
Yeah. So,
do you know what the Fox sisters did? What was their medium of communication? Did they have something dramatic? Tapping. Okay, tapping. So it's tapping.
So you had the Fox sisters sitting around the seance table along with other participants. And somehow you would have tapping and knocking. And you still do this in a paranormal investigation. This is an old school way of talking with the dead. And you would ask a question, and like one tap for yes, 2 knocks for no, or flip that. And they would perform this all around the world. Like people would hire them, mostly in the United States and in Europe, but people would hire them to come and to their party. And like I said, they would have a dinner, and then afterwards, instead of just retiring to a parlor, you would go there and do a seance instead. And I also forgot to note, table tipping was also a common way of divination. And this is also where talking boards became more popular. And I do know a family story of my own where my grandmother and her sisters back in the 19 teens would get their talking board after dinner and try to talk to the spirits of the dead.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wasn't there also a spiritualism thing where hands would come out? Isn't there some sort of, because there was somebody that wrote a book about it recently even, and they do like these seances where like a hand will come from another world or something like that.
I'm sure that was probably something done, but I don't remember that. I just really, the bits that stuck out to me were methods of automatic writing and then the ectoplasm and table tipping, because they're just so performative. And also not Ouija boards, but talking boards. Also dowsing rods started getting used too.
Yeah. Someone had asked about how the Fox sisters had gotten so well known, and from the readings of they had an older sister that was not a medium, but she was like the promoter, almost like the manager, and
their tour manager.
Yeah, she's the PT Barnum, and she's the one who really pushed them. And there later was a schism within the sisters, and one of them claimed that it was all her trying to capitalize on them. So it wasn't just that they had a method that wasn't debunked early or anything like that. It was that they were actively pushing this out, so they became very famous. And in particular, so I think it was Maggie Fox had kind of broken away and got married, and the other sister, Kate, I guess had like a drinking problem or something that was getting brought up, and so they Maggie came back and had a she kind of outed them, and she got paid to tell the secrets of how they did everything, and then a year later claimed that she recanted and said that she was being paid by a bunch of church leaders and stuff to say these things. And so it's both sides can claim oh, she either debunked everything or she was paid and she really is. And some of the methods she talked about was using their knuckles to rap on things, their toes, kind of the knuckles of their toes sometimes. Apples, they used to have like apples on strings and they drop them. And basically the idea, as I understood it, is that if you tap something somewhere and then give them suggestion that it's somewhere else, so you might tap something that hits the ground, and then you'd be like, oh, is that on your shoulder? And they think, oh yeah, I did. I feel something, but they don't really pay attention enough to where it is. And I think she said slate writing was a lot of writing with either toes or teeth.
You had said that, and when I was thinking about how you would draw, like where you had suggested how she might have done it, I was like, I don't even know how you would do that. The idea of her like tipping it up so she could look and all that. I mean, it sounded really difficult to do.
Yeah, I think it'd be difficult to, without actually seeing these ourselves, to we're a much more skeptical society in all of these things. We might look at here and say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't, that spirit is, that writing is horrible. That couldn't possibly, or we'd be sitting here analyzing, saying, well, wait a minute, Doyle was left-handed or whatever, and say, this slopes the wrong direction, or whatever. We would be looking at those things that people who want to believe are going to be, oh, well, this just proves, and I think the other thing is that even the people who were skeptics, if they couldn't explain it, it's kind of like magic. You go to a show, and until Penn and Teller tell us how it's done, we're like, I know it's not magic, like, it's some sort of sleight of hand, but I don't know how it's done. And and they're still claiming that that's what it is. So it's easier to just kind of go on. And then, like today, there's still so many unexplainable things. It's a ghost and UFO and whatever.
Which now is increasingly the UFO thing. We need to do a show on this. Like, they're releasing all this stuff now.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, I'm not saying it's aliens, but
right. Well, one of the things that we come across a lot as paranormal investigators that get called in to do these houses, seances, for the record, aren't something that are too common anymore. They've kind of fallen out of favor thanks to all the 1980s horror movies. But I've participated in one, and when you have the heightened mood that gets created with the dark ambiance and the candles, that mood will really, even when you go on an investigation, and we're going to be doing one later next month, just being in a dark room with very little light is enough to make you go, what's that? What's going on? All your senses just kind of spike up. And doing that with the seance, with any performative art, is going to really hype everyone there. And what we do have in investigations is clients will come in and they'll be showing us orb photos or photos of really what is hair in front of the lens or bugs or whatnot, or seeing faces and walls. And there's the phenomenon known as pareidolia, which is just the human mind will make familiar patterns in mess, basically. And we get those a lot submitted saying, my house is haunted because I'm seeing demon faces in my bathroom tile. And you're like, no. We would go investigate.
We read.
Make sure that the people are sound, that they're safe, and then say, here is a bottle of magic bubbles, and you want to spray this on this tile, and then use a magic eraser, and it will be gone. And just kind of calming people down.
So I was thinking the orbs that people are seeing from everybody has in-home cameras now. And what was it? Was it whoever does, was it Door, or who is it that does the camera that's in your house? They actually put out something saying those are
Ring.
not ghosts. Ring,
it was
that's
Ring.
what it is. Yeah, saying that's dust.
Like the company Ring. Like we have security cameras in our house, and once in a while we'll get a notification that something is walking through our living room, and if it's not my dog, it's going to be a large piece of dust or a bug that has passed by the camera. But yeah, it looks like paranormal orbs, that corpse candles. It can, but
do not have cameras in your house. Have them pointing outwards. Do not have them inwards. Unless you live with an abusive spouse, so you can catch them beating you and then you can have them arrested.
Well, in my case, it was to catch a dog peeing on our carpeting. So,
or that. Actually, I do have one in my living room, but it's facing my front door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where ours is too.
You know, speaking of the 80s and the backlash of things like Dungeons and Dragons, and how it's kind of interesting that the movies that many religious types hated actually have kept people from doing seances, because what's in those movies is so scary. People don't want to duplicate that there in their homes. How much flack, because you were talking about how those ministers paid off the sister to lie, so to speak. How incensed did the church get about this sort of thing? Was that a big scandal back then when it started?
I haven't read enough about that because I'm reading most of the spiritual movements, but church leaders in general were always the first to step up. And when you have a statue that is showing a nude figure, they're going to complain about it. When you're
Satan,
it's
Satan.
It's always going to be something, because it's not only, I'm not trying to be cynical here. It's that they're either, they have these sort of a spiritual thing, but then they also have their own, well, we don't want our believers going and following something that they know. So it's kind of a self-preservation for any sort of religious thing, and it's a little bit of power too. There's these church leaders are leaders in the community, and they don't want to.
Imagine what our world would be now if our main religion was spiritualism and not Catholicism.
I got an idea.
That would be fascinating. And I would think the reason, if everybody truly believed spiritualism was real, then it would have thrown everybody, I think, into a spiritual chaos, or just general chaos.
It's an interesting thing to muse about, because it's one of those, it reminds me of that line J.R. Tolkien wrote in one of his short stories, where it would have been different, but it would not have been better.
That could be.
Kind of, to me, anything that's an overarching power that has an interest in keeping itself in power, no matter what it is, doesn't necessarily, is not necessarily better. It's just different. And, it's good in some ways and awful in other ways. So I can't imagine any time you have a strict dogma, because you were talking about the spiritualist community in Indiana becoming its own thing, like a religion, and anytime you have, you're going to have people that are very dogmatic, and people that aren't, and you're going to have people that want to be gatekeepers, and there's always going to be someone, it's always going to be fraught with some sort of conflict, I would think.
And like Camp Chesterfield is not immune to that too, because of several of the mediums that used to work there got caught basically defrauding clients, and that was a major mark against the entire community. And it's the same with a lot of the mediums. Like, I think there was a decline right before World War II of the spiritualist movement because so many of these people were caught defrauding clients. And then you also had Harry Houdini, who I think we talked about before the show, very much trying, a skeptic who was trying to kind of save people their money from being made fools of by bad mediums. So yeah. And then you do have a decrease in the spiritualist movement even after World War II. I think people turned back to more traditional religious views at that time. And then you have the 1960s and the flower power generation, which brought back new age stuff, but not necessarily spiritualism.
Yeah. Careful.
Yeah. So Jeff, we're going to switch gears here to your new book, which is all about Tomorrowland at Disneyland. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I haven't talked that much about it publicly yet, but so this is kind of the thing. So I'm writing a book on the history of Tomorrowland throughout Disneyland, Disney World, and all the different iterations. Because what I'm fascinated by is that, the original vision was all about optimism of the future, technology making better life. And, Walt Disney's visions at that time was using corporate America to kind of help partnership into that. And space travel was big. And we kind of forget about this stuff, but they were pushing space and things before the space race even began. Disneyland opened in 55, Sputnik was in 57. And that some of the shows that Disney was putting out was actually explaining the push to go to space to the American public. And there's really kind of a cause and effect that the space race was kind of starting with, well, not that it's all Disney, but they were a key component to getting that moving, which is really quite, the impact in culture of Disney is really hard to understate, really. But then the problem with Tomorrowland is that we catch up to the future. The original Tomorrowland was set in the far off time of 1986.
I did not know it was 1986.
Yeah, it was, and they were supposed to have rockets to the moon as like passenger liners and all that. And so we catch up, and so even in Walt's lifetime, the 11 years that he was around with the park, he tore out almost everything in Tomorrowland and built a new one. And so every generation, you kind of need to reimagine Tomorrowland. And in particular, right now, the last major overhaul was in 1998, and people are saying this is not working. And so, what do you do about it? So, do you try to make it timeless, or do you try to continue to rewrite what the current version of the future is? And then the other fact is that space race, no one cares about space anymore. We've stopped sending rockets up ourselves. We don't have. It used to be that every single blast off was being watched. It's to a large degree, reaching the moon is still the pinnacle of human achievement. In 50 years since, we still haven't done anything different. So, as they say, we still haven't got our jetpacks. So kind of, right. So the book is kind of about like how the vision of what the future is changes, and then of course the nuts and bolts of, who designed this and what their inspiration was, and so it's a little bit of all of that. It got complicated when it became multiple Tomorrowlands.
Yeah.
feed into each other. So you have an attraction that starts in Florida, and then they have copies in Paris and whatever. And so it's, and then you have to kind of understand the history of the Disney Corporation at the same time. And, it's a pretty big undertaking. So I have a draft done, but I am in the editing phase.
The thing that's unique about Tomorrowland, and I've kind of wanted to talk to people, and particularly writers about this, is that one of the unique aspects to Tomorrowland is its optimism, like the power of science to make life better. Like you said, the rocket packs and travel to space, Star Trek, and all that stuff were extremely positive future. And it seems like a lot of science fiction now predicting the future is apocalyptic porn. I mean, we've talked about that before.
Yeah, that was kind of the big push. Is the Imagineers specifically said that once Blade Runner came out, and you have this dystopian future, that's became the norm. And you think about all of those 80s movies and further, and that's what we have. We got Road Warrior, Mad Max and RoboCop and Terminator and all these negative futures. When you ask people today, what do you think the future is? I was asking around, and my sister-in-law was like, "Oh, it's going to be a dystopia." Like that's what they think.
Yeah,
that's not what they thought back in the thing. And Walt was very much a futurist and optimist about that, and largely without having someone with his not only the vision, but he was the one in control, so he could say, "This is what we're doing," even if people say, "Why are you doing this?" And I've been rewatching the movie Tomorrowland that came out in 2015.
Oh yeah, that one.
And that is really, that's what it's about. The book, when you get down to it, plot and everything aside, it's about trying to say, wait a minute, why can't we go back to the optimism? There was a scene where there's a teenage girl in school, and everyone's talking about the polar ice caps melting and dystopian futures and all these things, and she keeps raising her hand saying, well, okay, things are bad, but what do we do to fix it? And that's what we're missing. And my argument for what Tomorrowland should be is that vision. Like, let's be optimistic, and how can we reach something? It's not just, and for the last 30, 40 years, Tomorrowland has been just science fiction. It wasn't space exploration, like, because rockets are cool. It was, this is the next.
That's a good stop.
Like
it
Netflix
doesn't
stuff
That's
like
a good. Yeah, that's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Right now. So
this has been a super interesting discussion.
well, Jeff, thank you for joining us.
my
So
pleasure.
if anyone wants to catch your writings, where can they find you?
Well, I actually now have a weekly column in the Inquirer on Sundays, which is also on Cincinnati.com. They've been making them subscriber only lately, but the paper, they're there. So every Sunday, somewhere in the A section, the page kind of moves. So I've been doing that, and hopefully by October I'll have a new book out, and I think there's a comic or something that is coming out about it.
A small little Cincinnati-based comic.
Yeah, there's a little
What
thing.
could that ever be?
Yeah, I know, right? I think there's a medium in it, and
Something about a magic 8-ball.
yeah,
It's got something for everyone.
yeah,
Future unknown.
yeah. Future
Exactly.
unknown. Well, thank you for joining us, Jeff. And
Thanks for having
for those, oh my goodness, what are your previous books that people can check out before your new one comes out?
Well, the new one, or the new one, is not Cincinnati based, but the other ones are. So we got Lost Cincinnati, Hidden History of Cincinnati, Cincinnati Then and Now, Cincinnati, an illustrated timeline, and I also did a book on the Art Academy.
Oh wow, so you got a lot. You can learn all about Cincinnati just from reading your books. Well,
Oh,
thank
great.
you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Every week, we dive into our hometown haunt mail bucket and find these wonderful stories that you, the listeners, are sending us. So this week's is from Bob, and he writes, I was going to my son's house for Easter. I was going to make something. I don't remember what exactly. I opened the cabinet where all the cookbooks were, and a sheet of paper fell out. It was a recipe for my late wife Kathy's cream cheese potatoes, and she always made for Easter, so I made them. That's all he wrote. That sounds tasty.
That's sweet.
That's very sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it when they
communicating to him.
Yeah.
Make these, honey.
Yeah, that basically, yeah. Talk about the spiritual movement. It's like, bam, spirit moved that one right in front of him.
Yeah, I mean, I thought there was a short and sweet one, and you know, very meaningful for him. Her communicating with him, and you know, I mean, it's such a sweet memory of her that she made that every holiday.
And it's actually a very common occurrence too for spirit to move things kind of like that to make it more obvious. But I like this. This is very sweet. Thank you everyone for listening to another wonderful episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents the Hometown Haunts podcast. I am your host, Kat Cloco. Along with me is Christina Wald and Jen Kohler, and you can find us at Sin Cabinet Curio on Twitter, at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities on Instagram, and like Bob above, you can always email us your hometown haunts at hometownhauntedmail@gmail.com. And